1960s, our grandparents lived by a strict financial code that has all but vanished. Today, we're uncovering 25 lost rules that kept families debt-free and banks at bay. The envelope system. Do you remember sitting at the kitchen table on a Friday evening after your father brought home his paycheck? In front of your mother sat a stack of plain white envelopes, edges slightly worn, with her neat cursive handwriting on each one. Rent, groceries, electric, and the most important one, savings. This was the world's first and most effective financial software. Every dollar bill was smoothed out and placed exactly where it belonged. The Steele discipline lay in this. If the entertainment envelope was empty by the 15th, there were no movies or ice cream trips until next month. There was no borrowing from the rent money to cover a whim. This clear-cut boundary kept families from falling into the debt spiral. They didn't need a complex Excel spreadsheet. They just needed honesty in those envelopes in the kitchen drawer. To them, the envelope didn't just hold cash. It held a promise of a secure future for their children. The cash is king philosophy. In today's world, a simple tap of a smartphone or a swipe of plastic can get us anything we desire. But in the 1960s, the physical weight of money felt different. Your father wouldn't buy a new lawnmower unless he had the exact bills in his wallet to count out at the counter. Counting out those ones, 5s and 20s, and physically seeing them leave your hand created a deep psychological connection to the value of labor. When you spend cash, you feel the pain of the loss and the pride of the achievement. Our grandparents had a simple rule. If the cash isn't in your hand, the item doesn't belong to you. Buy now, pay later was a foreign and dangerous concept. By refusing the seductive whispers of credit, they stayed outside the cycle of debt where interest rates can swallow a family's peace of mind in just a few months. The secret coffee can. If you peeked into the back of a pantry or under an old bed back then, chances are you'd find a vintage Maxwell House or Folgers coffee tin. But it wasn't filled with coffee grounds, it was stuffed with rolled-up bills. The family's emergency fund. The silent generation didn't rely on overdrafts or credit cards when trouble knocked. They believed in self-reliance. That coffee can was where every spare cent went. Change from the grocery trip, a little overtime pay, or money from mom's bake sale. It was the shield against life's sudden storms. An emergency room visit, a leaky roof after a gale, or a broken-down family car. Having that quiet cash in the kitchen allowed your parents to sleep at night. They knew that no matter what happened in the world outside, they had the dignity to handle their own problems without begging the bank for a loan. The pride of layaway. Today we have buy now, pay later. But the 1960s had something much better. Layaway. Imagine your mother spotting a beautiful winter coat at Sears in August. Instead of charging it and going into debt, she'd put it on layaway. She'd pay a few dollars down, and the store would tuck that coat away in a back room just for her. Every week, she'd stop by and pay a few more dollars. The moment she handed over the final coins in November and walked out with that coat, that was a victory. Wearing something you fully owned without owing a single penny felt much sweeter than wearing it while facing 12 months of installments. Layaway taught an entire generation about patience and the value of the wait. It allowed families to enjoy luxuries without ever facing the crushing weight of debt. Collectors or high interest. Buying for life. The 1960s was an era of things built to last. When your grandparents decided to buy a refrigerator or a washing machine, it wasn't a whim. It was a 30-year investment. They would rather save for an extra 6 months to buy a reputable heavy-duty brand than buy something cheap on credit. Their philosophy was simple. I'm not rich enough to buy cheap things. Quality meant they didn't waste money on constant repairs or replacements, what modern manufacturers call planned obsolescence. This meticulousness kept the family's cash flow stable. They respected their possessions, treating them like old friends. When you don't have to replace your appliances every few years, you have more money to put into those white envelopes in the kitchen drawer. It was a cycle of sustainable prosperity that we've unfortunately forgotten. Was your mother the queen of envelopes in your house? Type yes if you remember those little labeled packets in the kitchen drawer. The Saturday repair ritual. In the 1960s, the sound of a Saturday morning wasn't a notification on a smartphone. It was the rhythmic clinking of a wrench against a metal pipe or the low hum of a workbench grinder. Your father didn't have a handyman on speed dial. He was the handyman. When the toaster stopped popping or the vacuum lost its suction, the first destination wasn't the trash bin. It was the garage workbench. There was a profound sense of mechanical literacy back then. Men took pride in understanding how their world worked. They would spend hours meticulously disassembling a motor, cleaning every spring and gear, and oiling parts that modern manufacturers now seal in plastic. Every appliance saved from the landfill was another $100 that stayed in the family's pocket. By maintaining what they owned, our grandparents ensured that their hard-earned money wasn't constantly leaking out to replace things that should have never broken in the first place. Mending, not discarding. If you looked closely at the knees of a young boy's trousers or the elbows of a father's favorite cardigan in 1965, you would often see the delicate crisscross patterns of a careful mend. In those days, a hole in a sock or a tear in a dress wasn't an excuse to go to the mall. It was an appointment with the sewing basket. Your mother or grandmother possessed a quiet magic with a needle and thread, turning a potential loss into a creative repair. This culture of mending was a powerful invisible shield against debt. We live in a throwaway society now, but back then, textiles were treated as precious resources. Buttons were harvested from old shirts and kept in glass jars like tiny treasures. Sheets were turned, moving the worn center to the edges, to give them another 5 years of life. By extending the lifespan of every fabric in the house, the family clothing budget remained incredibly low. This discipline meant that new clothes were bought for milestones and special occasions, not because of a missing button. It taught us that new isn't always better, and that there is a quiet dignity in wearing something that has been cared for by loving hands. The backyard grocery store. Step out the back door of a typical 1960s home, and you wouldn't just find a manicured lawn, you'd find a vibrant, edible landscape. The backyard garden was the secret weapon of the household budget. Long before organic became a premium marketing term, our grandparents were growing beefsteak tomatoes, snap peas, and collard greens in the rich soil behind the garage. Every jar of pickles on the pantry shelf and every bag of frozen corn represented a direct reduction in the monthly grocery bill. By producing their own food, families insulated themselves from the rising prices at the supermarket. The garden also turned children into productive members of the household economy. We learned to weed, water, and harvest, understanding that our labor directly fed the family. The hand-me-down chain. In the 1960s, a new shirt didn't just belong to one child, it belonged to a generation. There was a legendary hand-me-down chain that stretched across neighborhoods and through branches of the family tree. When the eldest brother outgrew his Sunday suit, it didn't go to a thrift store. It was carefully folded, placed in a box, and passed down to the younger brother or a cousin across town. This wasn't seen as a sign of struggle, it was seen as common sense, and a beautiful way to maintain family bonds. Every garment carried the history of those who wore it before. By the time a winter coat reached the third or fourth child, it had been softened by years of play and strengthened by countless repairs. This practice effectively eliminated the need for constant back-to-school shopping sprees that drive so many modern families into credit card debt. It taught children that their value didn't come from wearing the latest fashion, but from being part of a community that looked out for one another. The chain of clothing was a chain of survival, ensuring every child was dressed with dignity, without a single cent of interest being paid. Canning and the art of the pantry. If the kitchen was the heart of the 1960s home, the pantry was its fortress. During the late summer months, the house would grow warm with the steam of boiling water as mothers and grandmothers engaged in the ancient art of canning. Rows of mason jars filled with peaches and syrup, green beans, and spice preserves would line the cellar shelves like gold bars in a vault. This was the ultimate hedge against inflation and seasonal debt. By buying in bulk when produce was at its cheapest, or harvesting from their own gardens, families ensured they would never have to pay off-season prices at the store. A well-stocked pantry meant that even if the father faced a slow week at the factory or the furnace needed an unexpected repair, the family would still eat like royalty. There was no need for emergency grocery trips on credit when you had 50 jars of vegetables in the basement. It was the physical manifestation of the save for a rainy day philosophy, providing a sense of security that no modern bank account could ever replicate. To continue with more content, comment yes to let us know you're still following. If there's anything we can improve, take a moment to leave a comment. We're always looking to get better. Thanks so much. Bartering over coffee. In the 1960s, currency wasn't always something you pulled out of a leather wallet. Often, it was a skill you carried in your hands. Bartering was the heartbeat of the neighborhood economy. Imagine a Saturday afternoon. The neighbor to your left was a wizard with car engines, while the neighbor to your right was a master carpenter. Instead of calling a commercial garage and sliding a credit card into a machine, your father would walk across the lawn with a thermos of coffee or a plate of mom's fresh biscuits. "I'll fix your porch steps if you can help me tune up the Chevy," was the standard contract of the era. This informal exchange of labor meant that major household expenses were often handled without a single dollar changing hands. It was a brilliant, tax-free way to maintain a high quality of life on a modest budget. But more than that, bartering built a social credit that no bank could measure. It turned neighbors into partners and transformed a street of houses into a fortress of mutual survival. By trading what they knew for what they needed, our grandparents bypassed the commercial world entirely, keeping their cash for the one thing you couldn't barter for: the property taxes. Multi-generational fortresses. In the modern era, we value independence so much that we often pay for it with crippling debt, separate mortgages, separate utility bills, and expensive childcare. But in the 1960s, the multi-generational home was the standard economic fortress. It wasn't uncommon to have grandpa in the converted attic, the parents in the main rooms, and a house full of children. This wasn't a sign of failure, it was a masterclass in resource pooling. By living together, the family cut their overhead by nearly 2/3. Grandpa's pension or social security check helped cover the heating oil, while mom and dad's income paid the mortgage. Perhaps most importantly, the grandmother clause eliminated one of the biggest debts modern families face: childcare. With grandma there to watch the little ones and teach them their ABCs, every cent of the parents' wages stayed in the family. They understood that collective strength was far superior to individual struggle. They traded a bit of privacy for total financial freedom, ensuring that the family home remained a debt-free sanctuary that could be passed down through the generations. Local credit unions versus big banks. Our grandparents had a healthy, ingrained suspicion of the giant, faceless banks and the glass skyscrapers. Instead, they put their faith and their nickels into local credit unions and small, community-owned savings and loans. These weren't institutions driven by predatory fees or quarterly shareholder profits. They were often started by groups of workers at the local plant or members of the parish. The manager of the local credit union knew your name, your father's reputation, and exactly how many years you had left on your house. Loans were granted based on character and handshakes, rather than an opaque computer-generated credit score. Because these institutions were owned by the members themselves, the interest rates were fair, and the goal was always to help the member get out of debt, not keep them in it. Our grandparents knew that when you borrowed from a neighbor-owned institution, you were part of a circle of trust. This local focus kept the community's wealth circulating within the town, preventing the interest rate drain that bleeds modern bank accounts dry today. Community accountability. In the tight-knit neighborhoods of the 1960s, your financial business wasn't nearly as private as it is today. And that was a good thing. There was a powerful sense of community accountability. If someone in the neighborhood bought a flashy new Cadillac they clearly couldn't afford, the whispers at the local barbershop or the church social would start immediately. Living beyond your means was seen as a moral lapse, a sign that you were putting on airs at the expense of your family's security. Nobody wanted to be the subject of that neighborhood gossip. This social pressure acted as a natural brake on impulsive spending. You didn't keep up with the Joneses by going into debt. You competed with them to see who could be the most resourceful. Children were taught that a good name was more valuable than a new car, and a good name was built on paying your bills on time and owing no man. The church safety net. Long before the government-sponsored social programs became the first line of defense, the local church was the ultimate safety net for the 1960s family. When a father lost his job at the mill or a family was hit with a sudden medical crisis, the Deacon's Fund or the Ladies' Auxiliary went into quiet, efficient action. Groceries would appear on the porch. An anonymous envelope of cash would find its way into a coat pocket to cover a heating bill. There were no 19% interest rates, no paperwork, and no humiliation. Just a community taking care of its own. Members gave what they could during the good years, knowing that the net would catch them during the bad ones. This system meant that families rarely had to turn to predatory lenders or high-interest finance companies during an emergency. By relying on faith and fellowship instead of commercial credit, our grandparents kept their dignity intact and their balance sheets black. The church ensured that a temporary setback never turned into a permanent debt. Do you miss the days when neighbors helped each other fix a fence for just a cold lemonade and a handshake? Share a handshake emoji if you do. The debt is slavery mindset. In the 1960s, our grandparents didn't view a loan as a financial tool or a lever. They viewed it as a tether. There was a deeply ingrained belief that the borrower is servant to the lender. To owe money to a bank or a merchant was to give away a piece of your freedom. They understood that as long as you had a monthly payment, you didn't truly own your time. You were working to line the pockets of a stranger in a suit. This mindset was a powerful psychological shield. When a salesman offered a low monthly payment on a new television, our grandfathers didn't hear opportunity. They heard the clink of a shackle. They preferred the hard life of saving up to the easy life of installments because they valued the ability to look any man in the eye and know they owed him nothing. This visceral dislike of debt wasn't about being miserly. It was about being a master of one's own destiny. They knew that a debt-free man could walk away from a bad job or speak his mind at a town hall meeting without fear of losing his livelihood to a creditor. For them, a clear conscience and a clear balance sheet were the true definitions of an American freeman. Living below means on purpose. We live in an era of lifestyle creep, where every raise at work immediately translates into a bigger SUV or a more expensive zip code. But the 1960s generation practiced the quiet art of living below their means, not by accident, but by design. Even when a father received a promotion at the factory or a mother took on extra shifts at the school, the family's standard of living often remained exactly the same. The extra income didn't go toward a flashy lifestyle, it went straight into the rainy day fund or toward paying off the mortgage. They took pride in the fact that their neighbors couldn't guess their bank balance by looking at their driveway. This margin in their budget was their ultimate security. It meant that if the economy took a downturn or the radiator blew, it was a minor inconvenience rather than a catastrophe. They understood that wealth wasn't what you spent, it was what you kept. By intentionally keeping their needs small, they made their world large. They weren't interested in keeping up with the Joneses. They were interested in outlasting them. The discipline of waiting. If there is one thing that credit cards have destroyed, it is the discipline of the wait. In the 1960s, if you wanted a new set of patio furniture or a high-end camera, you had to endure the long, slow march of saving for it. You would put a picture of that item on the refrigerator and watch the savings jar grow, nickel by nickel, dime by dime. This period of waiting served a vital psychological purpose. It filtered out impulsive desires. Often, by the time you had saved enough money, you realized you didn't really need the item as much as you thought. But if you did still want it, the joy of finally bringing it home was immense. Our grandparents knew that instant gratification was a trap that led to permanent regret. By forcing themselves to wait, they ensured that every dollar spent was a conscious decision, not an emotional whim. One-car families and modest dreams. The 1960s was the golden age of the American automobile, but for most families, the driveway held only one car. It was a shared resource, a hub for family errands, and a symbol of practical mobility. Modern families often buckle under the weight of 2 or 3 car payments, but our grandparents viewed a second car as a luxury that rarely justified the cost. They planned their lives around a single vehicle, coordinating school drops, grocery runs, and work commutes. This modesty extended to every part of their lives. They weren't looking for McMansions or exotic vacations. They found contentment in a sturdy 3-bedroom ranch and a weekend camping trip to a state park. Their dreams were built on a human scale, small enough to be paid for in cash, but large enough to hold a lifetime of memories. By choosing enough over more, they avoided the crushing overhead that forces so many today to live paycheck to paycheck. They realized that a smaller house meant more laughter and one car meant more walks together. They traded status for stability, and it was a bargain that paid dividends for a lifetime. The instinctive suspicion of free money. Whenever a 1960s family heard the word free or no money down, their internal alarm bells went off. They were raised by parents who had survived the Great Depression, and they possessed a hawk-like instinct for the hidden catch in any financial offer. They knew that if a merchant was offering you something without an immediate cost, you were going to pay for it 3 times over in the long run. This skepticism was a vital defense mechanism against the burgeoning credit industry. When the first all-purpose credit cards began to appear in mailboxes, I know many of our grandparents threw them straight into the fireplace. They didn't see a convenient way to pay. They saw a trapdoor into a pit of interest. They preferred the hard terms of a local merchant they could talk to face-to-face over the easy terms of a faceless corporation. This refusal to be lured by the bait of easy credit kept them in control of their financial lives. They weren't cynical. They were just wise enough to know that in this world, there is no such thing as a free lunch. And they'd rather pack their own sandwich than owe the deli. Looking back, what is the most valuable money lesson your grandparents taught you? I'd love to read your stories in the comments below. The mortgage burning party. In the 1960s, there was no celebration more prestigious than a mortgage burning party. Imagine the scene. Family and neighbors gathered in the backyard, a small fire pit crackling in the center. The guest of honor wasn't a person, but a piece of paper, the deed to the house. When the final payment was made, families would literally set their mortgage documents on fire. Our grandparents didn't view a 30-year mortgage as a lifelong companion. They viewed it as an enemy to be defeated as quickly as possible. They would put every spare nickel, every holiday bonus, and every tax refund toward the principal. They understood that a house you truly own is more than just shelter. It is a fortress that no economic storm can shake. By burning that paper, they were declaring their total independence from the banking system. They weren't tenants of a bank. They were the kings and queens of their own dirt. This singular focus on ownership provided a foundation of security that allowed them to age with dignity and peace. Teaching the value of a penny. Financial education in a 1960s household didn't happen in a classroom. It happened at the grocery store and over the Saturday morning chores. Children were taught the life of a penny from the moment they could walk. If you wanted a new baseball glove or a Saturday matinee ticket, you didn't just ask for it, you earned it. You mowed lawns, you shoveled snow, or you helped mom with the heavy laundry. Our grandparents knew that if they gave us everything we wanted without effort, they were raising us to be victims of the credit industry. By making us wait and work, they were tattooing the value of labor onto our souls. We learned that money was a limited resource, a byproduct of time and sweat. This early training created a generation that was naturally allergic to debt. We grew up understanding that if you couldn't afford it today, you worked harder tomorrow. Financial unity in marriage. In the 1960s, there was rarely such a thing as his money and her money. There was only family money. Marriage was viewed as a joint economic venture, and financial unity was the glue that kept the household debt-free. Husbands and wives operated like a 2-person board of directors. Major purchases were discussed at length over late-night coffee, and both partners had to be in total agreement before a single dollar was spent. This transparency acted as a natural filter for impulsive spending. If mom wanted a new sofa, dad had to see the logic. If dad wanted a new hunting rifle, mom had to agree the budget could handle it. This mutual accountability meant that no one could secretly rack up debt or hide retail therapy from the other. They understood that a house divided against itself, especially in its checkbook, would eventually fall. By aligning their goals and their values, they created a unified front against the temptations of the consumer world. The pride in pre-owned goods. Long before vintage became a trendy fashion statement, our grandparents were masters of the pre-owned market. In the 1960s, there was no shame in buying a used car, a second-hand dining table, or a refurbished sewing machine. In fact, it was a point of pride. Finding a high-quality item that someone else had discarded and bringing it back to life was considered a sign of high intelligence and resourcefulness. They looked for good bones in everything they bought. They knew that a solid oak table from 1940 was 10 times better than a flimsy new one made of particle board. By opting for used goods, they bypassed the massive depreciation that comes with buying new. This allowed them to live a high-quality life on a fraction of the cost. They weren't interested in the new car smell. They were interested in the no car payment feeling. This lack of vanity was their greatest financial asset. They realized that status symbols were just expensive anchors, and they preferred to travel light, free from the weight of owing money on things that were losing value every day. The peace of mind, the ultimate reward. If you asked your grandfather why he worked so hard to stay out of debt, he probably wouldn't give you a lecture on interest rates. He would simply tell you, "I like to sleep at night." The final and most important reason they had no debt was because they valued peace of mind over possessions. They understood that the most expensive thing you can buy is a night of worry-free sleep. In the 1960s, the home was a sanctuary, not a source of stress. There were no collection calls, no final notice envelopes in the mail, and no anxiety about the next interest rate hike. This psychological tranquility allowed them to focus on what truly mattered: their faith, their family, and their community. They lived with a sense of quiet confidence, knowing that they owned everything under their roof. This peace was the invisible wealth of the 1960s. It provided a quality of life that no amount of credit could ever purchase. The debt-free life of the 1960s wasn't about being stingy, it was about being free. Our grandparents understood that true wealth is measured by what you own, not what you owe. Perhaps the secret to a brighter future lies in these forgotten pages of the past. We'll see you in the next memory.